Hey there, guys. My name is Adam Valenta. I am on the ventures team at Capital Factory, where I help companies fundraise, prepare for their fundraising presentations, market capture strategy, and fundraising strategy. But today, I am so grateful for y'all to be joining us for our Intro to Startup Scene and AMA with Dave Lee. We highly encourage everyone to ask questions, and we'll get to them towards the end of the Q&A. But before we get started, I'm going to bring up our CEO, Josh Baer, to explain more about Capital Factory.
Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. And with our team spread across the state in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, we meet all the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to the people that they need to meet most: investors, customers, and talent to grow their team. We watch all of this happen so that we have this unique insight into the market and use that to invest in all the best companies through our Texas Fund. And we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas since 2010.
Well, let me unmute. All right. What's up, guys? So Capital Factory has a variety of resources to get you plugged into the ecosystem here in Texas. We host this AMA monthly. And to provide you with more information about all of these resources and stuff around the state. We'll be taking questions from the audience in about 20 minutes, so feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll take note of them and get towards them towards the end. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have the pleasure of hosting David Lee today. So I'm going to just read off his phenomenal description here. So Dave Lee is a business executive and technology entrepreneur with 25 plus years of experience in leading staffing, digital media, medical devices, and biotechnology companies. He is the CEO and co-founder of two award-winning tech companies, Nano 3D Biosciences and Covelo Group, and is currently an entrepreneur in residence at Capital Factory in Austin, Texas. Dave is an avid endurance athlete where he has completed multiple marathons, ironman triathlons, and ultramarathons. And is equally passionate about serving nonprofit boards, including Girls on the Run in the greater Houston area, Medical Bridges, and 100 Men Houston. Dave attended the University of Colorado at Boulder and Northwestern's University Kellogg Business of Management. So with that being said, I'd love to bring Dave up to the virtual stage. Hey there, Dave. How's your day going?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a wonderful day here in Austin. I have some lemonade in here from Chick-fil-A, just feeling refreshed. How are you?
I'm great as well, thank you. And I'm here in Houston. It's probably not as wonderful as in Houston as Austin, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, I'm ready for the weather to start cooling down a little bit. It was 110 in my car yesterday, and it was just a little too much for us.
Ouch.
Yeah. So first, before jumping into the questions, let's dive into your bio a little bit more. It would be great to hear a little bit more about your background and some meaningful things that have gotten you to where you are today.
Sure. I guess my background is a little unusual for an entrepreneur. It was really something I never had set about to do in particularly the early stages of my professional career. When I was at university, we didn't have courses on entrepreneurship or anything like that. So it wasn't, something that I always dreamed of doing, like running my own company. Really, the first half of my professional career was very focused on just learning as much as I could, building the skill sets, and really, I was aspiring to kind of become what some of my early mentors were. It's really successful CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies. And I looked at them and I kind of said, boy, I need that skill set, and I need this skill set. So I really was very focused on kind of in the corporate realm, just kind of working my way through and learning as much as I could. And about halfway through my career was really, I guess, the first step. And it was really more as what we would call an entrepreneur. I was working for a large oil and gas company. We were working on a human capital issue, but not really from a human resources standpoint. If people are familiar with oil and gas, it's a really volatile and cyclical cycle. And in the early 2000s, it was facing some real serious people challenges, just multi-billion-dollar projects that were impacted. And so it was at a very strategic level. I was kind of trying to solve this for a big company. And we came up with a really interesting solution technology based. We basically took the things that the industry was very good at in supply chain management, and we applied it to human capital. Most people didn't think it could work, but kind of based on my background, I really, felt that there was a high rate of success by really just becoming much more efficient in how they process these things. And so, long story short, we started building this program in-house. It worked really well. In fact, it worked so well, we had customers outside of it kind of asking for this type of service. And over that period of time, I was starting to build some C-level relationships with folks, and people started saying, like, you should think about starting your own thing, because this is a really interesting model. And, I had built it for this company, but, that's not the focus of their company. They want to utilize it internally. And so, I made a decision to kind of leap away from a corporate job, and I left with some developers on my team and some account folks, and we had no money. We had kind of a handshake deal in place with a major engineering construction company. They basically said, Dave, if you build it, we'll come along with you. And so kind of on that, we all left. And so it was very different, I think, from how a normal entrepreneur would start up with a startup company, because it was kind of things that I had built and processed and learned over a period of time, and then kind of replicated on the outside. So that was really kind of my first entry into that world. I didn't know anything about it. I had to learn as much as I could in that process. Fortunately, I had some really good people around me to get through it. And, coincidentally, about 6 months later was really my first true startup. And kind of in parallel, I was starting to run two companies. And it was a realm that I never really even thought I would be in. It was a medical device biotechnology company. It just so happens my good friends were world-class scientists. These guys had come up with a remarkable invention that came out of Rice and MD Anderson. They saw me build this company from the ground level up, and they said, we need a business person on our team. And I know nothing about what you guys are doing. And so I was very green. But again, it was kind of this long journey that we went through together. Certainly a big learning curve for me. But that was really kind of my head first dive into it. So, I mean, there's so many lessons along the way, but I guess one of the main reasons I'm involved with places like Capital Factory is, there was a heavy dependence, and I look back and I realize that there's no way that company, Nano 3D, could have made it if we didn't have really strong mentors and advisors around us. And so that's why I like spending time with entrepreneurs.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in it for the exact same reasons. So you experienced some challenges in the early days as an entrepreneur, as every entrepreneur does. What are, let's say, one or two of the biggest things that you learned that you could tell other founders?
Yeah, there's a couple interesting stories, and in kind of in different perspectives, right? So one would be a lesson in kind of thinking about things creatively. So when I left that oil and gas company, we started, I mentioned we didn't have any money. We bootstrapped it. We did it with our own, whatever funds that we had to kind of throw into it. Fortunately, the technology, my team could build on our own. So they did that on their own. But when we came time to launch, I had a dilemma of working capital. We were talking about a program that was going to, in essence, handle about $20 million in invoicing per year to manage these types of programs. And so that's a huge responsibility and can be a scary burden depending on how you get paid, when you get paid, and when you can pay your vendors. And so I was kind of stuck in terms of how do we do this? Do we go fundraise right away? Do we take out loans? Do we create some sort of bridge, capital to be able to do this? And then, I had a friend who's at the time, he was a CFO of a service company in oil and gas. And so he was very familiar with kind of structuring these types of deals and relationships with owner operators. And he suggested, this is what we do in our industry. You should do the same thing. When we have major projects, we basically ask the owner operator, for an execution fee, because we got to deploy some major equipment, we got to deploy people. And so they give us an execution fee, we deploy it, and then, we'll pay them back. So I'm like, wow, that's an interesting idea. I don't think anyone's ever thought of doing that in this realm, right? Because we're not talking about heavy assets. But I figured I have a relationship with the CFO of this company. I'll go pitch this idea to him. And so it ended up being like such a wonderful blessing because partly because of the relationship we had with them, partly because of that person's experience in structuring agreements and contracts this way. He was comfortable, but primarily he put a lot of trust in us. But what it meant was that I never had to go out and raise money. I didn't have to get a bank loan. They basically extended me a $500,000 line of credit. In essence, they literally wrote me a check for $500,000 with the agreement that every month as we process the services and invoicing, I'd pay them a little bit. In our calculations, we could pay them back within 12 months. And we did. We actually paid them back a little bit earlier than probably 10 months. And so the lesson from that was like, boy, it's like it pays off to be really creative and to really think about a different alternative, because this is something that most people in human capital would have never approached this way. Like it's just not done. It's unheard of, but it's very common in the hard assets industry. So, that was a really important learning for me to kind of look at it from very different angles and to be creative. Another lesson was really much more kind of tactical, and in that same company, a challenge that came up later was, and this oftentimes happens when you have co-founders, sometimes people leave. Sometimes the relationships fall through. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes, people want to leave or they need to get, forced to leave in some cases. And that's what an operating agreement typically is for within the LLC. And because none of us have never done this before, we just had a kind of a cookie cutter, agreement that one of my partners basically pulled off the internet. We didn't hire a lawyer to do it. We just thought, well, this looks good enough. We did it. But it ended up being like really painful because when this person left, we had to figure out like, all right, how do we handle this exit, and what does that person get, if anything? And so there was really, and we were all friends, right? Like we were colleagues and friends to do this together with the right intent, but it became a really uncomfortable situation because of that. So, I quickly realized like, boy, it's much better to spend a little bit of money, get really sound legal advice on something like this, get those things kind of formalized before these types of questions kind of come up. So, that's, hopefully no one has to go through that, but it's a really easy remedy. Like, don't take shortcuts in those types of things.
Yeah, definitely. I want to loop back on, the interesting, I guess you could say, funding vehicle that you used for the business. Could you kind of, take a look at it, take a step back and look at how venture capital has now impacted the world in 2021 and this humongous buzzword startups, and look at it how you were back then and kind of make the distinction between, or notify these founders that, hey, you can use other forms of financing other than VC money, and maybe give some reasons as to why VC might not be the way to go.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, I think it's a very important vehicle, and I think in many cases, particularly tech companies, will need a VC round or multiple VC rounds to really kind of plant the trajectory for where they're going to go. But it's not the only option. So, I've a couple of kind of paths that I've fallen into, and they're both a little bit different, but I think it's always made me kind of look at it holistically. So when I talk to, young entrepreneurs about this, it's so dependent on your business, the type of business, how much funding you need, what your goals are, and if they align with what VCs are looking for. Professional investors have a very specific recipe for what they're looking for, right? It's not really an emotional purchasing decision for them. There's a formula, and they need to make an X amount of return, and so they get only so many swings of the bat, and so they got to really make sure that if they're going to take a swing with a company, that it fits kind of all the criteria for that they're looking for. In some cases, your company may not fit the criteria. So, one vantage point I have is kind of from that very first company. In one of the, right or wrong, like kind of how I look at it is like, try to do it with your own money if at all possible. Like, it's just not to go out there and get VC funding. Not because I don't want to dilute equity in shares. It's not that at all. It's just there's much more control. Now, in many cases, that's impossible, but it's really kind of the first task, right? Like, is there any way that we can bootstrap this? Can we do it on our own? Can we get to a point where we have enough revenue generation that we can survive without going outside for any help? Now, you can do that. In some cases, you still want a VC round or infusion of money because it'll accelerate what you're doing. So there's a trade-off on kind of how you look at it. But, one of the first stances I take is like, well, let's exhaust all your internal resources. Make sure you're doing everything that you can on your own. Because, by the way, VCs are going to kind of look at it the same way, right? They're going to look at how much sweat equity you put in, how much of your own money have you put in, how invested are you, in this idea and in this project that you want us to invest in. And the other experience I have comes from my biotech company. We were a device company that was in an area that was not really sexy for VCs, meaning we were selling a research and development tool to researchers around the world. And so, biotech is a really broad space. And like if you're in pharmaceuticals, there's usually almost a requirement of VC funding because it's such a long trajectory and such a long path, such a long runway. You need tens of millions of dollars typically in that process. So most of the VCs that we were talking to, like those were the types of deals that they were looking at. Some of them really liked us. They really thought we had something really exceptional. They liked us as a team. They were rooting for us. We were just not the right size for the deal. We were looking for, at the time, anywhere from 2 to maybe 5 million if we stretch around. And most of the companies that we were talking to didn't even look at deals under $10 million, right? So we realized as we went kind of shopping this around and talking to VCs that we really weren't the right fit for most of them. So, it's, part of it is who you are, what you're trying to do strategically. Does it align with those types of VCs? And so what we ended up doing, at Nano 3D was everything outside of VC funding, right? We started with our own money. We bootstrapped as long as we could. We went friends and family round. We begged and borrowed from as many people as we could to cobble together enough money just to kind of execute the types of licensing deals and things that we needed to just get the business going, open up a lab. My co-founders were scientists, so they were very good at writing grants. So we had a strategy to get as much federal grant money as we could to kind of drive our R&D stuff for the future. So we had money coming in from that. We did angel rounds, so we were probably just as busy pitching to angels and other entities as other companies were to pitching to VCs. We just knew quickly where we were suited for and what we needed. And so that was helpful. And we got, we got some really good advice from, some really well-known VCs in our area anyways, who gave us that advice, like, yeah, you guys are great, but really not that right fit. So we just changed strides, right? So I think it's so dependent on the company that you're trying to build. But I think what you said earlier is so true. There are many different avenues that you can go besides the VC round. And sometimes VC round is absolutely the way to go. But, as many people will tell you, it's just as hard to raise, $500,000 with angels as it is to raise 50 million with VCs, right? It's the same process. Yeah. You probably got to pitch to as many people to get, go through the nose to get to that yes. So it's a very similar pathway.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. I think whenever I was starting my first company, I realized that there was this disconnect between a first-time founder who is, has that founder bias and they're so excited about their idea, and then the VC on the other side of the table who has to deal with power law dynamics and portfolio construction, all of these very intricate variables that go into, running a fund. Anyone who is listening is an avid reader. I would definitely tell y'all to go read Venture Deals by Brad Feld. Phenomenal book. Breaks down everything from term sheets to lawyers to everything you need to know about venture capital deals. Read that book. Yeah. So let's move on to another question. Whenever you first started your company, what are some of the resources that you wish that you had?
That's a really good question. I think we were really fortunate because I mean, Nano 3D is probably the ideal example, right? Like this is an area that I was completely new to. I was ignorant in many aspects of that space. Like, for example, I didn't, in my professional career, I very rarely had to deal with intellectual property. In this space, like that was basically it. Like if you didn't have that protected, you didn't have a company. And so we had to learn really quickly on building that portfolio, how you protect it, and all those things. And so, fortunately, there were resources around at that time. We were, coming about, and we started in 2008. This is early days in kind of the ecosystem here in Houston, but there were some really good resources and people that were around. There was a group that we met with called Houston Technology Center. They don't exist anymore. They're now Houston Exponential, but it was quite different. They were, kind of a hub for resources. It was an accelerator type of program. But for us, it was instrumental in that through them, we met some really key advisors that were in the space that could help me with intellectual portfolio, IP management, licensing, like structuring a licensing deal with the universities that our IP came out of was hugely critical. And so we met a very important person. Our counsel was a really major lawyer from a really big firm that we could never afford. But we met them through HTC, and he took a liking to us and took us under a wing in essence, and he became our legal counsel. And really without him, we probably wouldn't have been able to get a licensing deal because it was so difficult. Really getting that structured with the tech transfer person at the time out of Rice University, that without his really strength, because he literally had to kind of go in there and tell the head of legal at Rice, like, what you're proposing is ridiculous. Like it don't exist in space. Like this company would be failed from the beginning. And there are things that I just could not articulate as the CEO that he could as a lawyer based on his experience. And so his chops paid off, right? So you got to have people like that in your circle, because in some you're just not going to win the battles that you have to win. So I think we were really fortunate because, timing was that those resources were available. We had to go find them and seek them out. And fortunately for us, like we also knew we were green. Like, so people would probably say that we were really coachable because, we had world-class scientists, and I felt like I was a pretty good business guy, but we all knew that there was a lot of stuff that we don't know. So, I think being coachable was really kind of a key aspect to it of kind of getting the information that you need out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think the main takeaway from that response is that if you are a coachable individual and you optimize for learning and, adding those rapid feedback loops to your lifestyle, basically anyone and any resources that you need are accessible. You just have to be willing to go out, find the right people, talk to the right people, and also surround yourself with people who are much more intelligent than you are. That's how I've optimized my life. And I thought my schooling was going to be done at college. It's not. I get taken to school every single day, and it's literally the greatest thing in the world. I love learning things every single day. And I think that if the audience optimizes for that, then they will be well on their way to success.
Yeah.
So we actually have a question from the audience. So let's go ahead and do that. What were some startup community resources, networking, information, etc., you learned at the beginning of your journey?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in Houston we had HTC. I think in all the major markets in Texas, you'll find similar things. Capital Factory is, I think, a really important resource right now across kind of the four hubs that we have in Texas. And so you got to seek those out. I think every community is different. Like when I look inside of the Houston ecosystem, there's so many resources now. You've got the ION that's starting up in conjunction with the city of Houston and Rice University. You've got Capital Factory. You've got, there's probably 7 or 8 different, accelerators or hubs that have either started from Houston or are kind of transplants from other cities that have now come here. And so you have to really seek them out and tap yourself into them. So, in our early days, HTC was kind of the main one, but, they weren't the only one. And so we really made a point to spend as much time as we could connecting with people within that community. And so, the networking, I think people get sometimes confused with really the purpose and intent of networking. Networking can happen pretty much anywhere, right? It's not just from a networking event or some type of meetup. You have to really have the mindset of, I need to be always networking, right? Like you can't afford to do that, because you're either always looking for funding or, customers or partners or something, like you're always looking for some resource that's going to help you. So that's kind of how we looked at every event and every, anything that we went seeking help. And in return, we try to help anyone that we could as well, right? So, I think, you got to kind of do some research in your own space on all that exists. If you look at Houston Exponential, they're a great resource, because you could go to their website and there's everything laid out, with all the different resources and things that are happening within Houston. So I think there's similar things that are happening in San Antonio and Dallas and Austin. But I think Capital Factory is a great place to start. Like, as you mentioned, you guys have so many events going on all the time. It's hard for me to even keep up with, because there's so many cool things happening. I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have, gone to that or seen that. So it's great. That's the content we need, and that's the education that people probably are thirsting for.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most exciting things is whenever I go into the office in Austin and I'm working from the co-working space, I can just be doing some emails for a little bit, but there's so many serendipitous moments within that area, because there's just so many different people working on so many different ideas, and there is always someone in that space that can help you with something that you're working on, always. Yeah. So really take advantage of all of the things that we're putting on. We do this every single month. We host events every single month. So be sure to join us for those. That'll be so wonderful. So let's move on to the next question. Well, we actually kind of just answered that one. This one was how to get into Texas startup scene. So that's pretty easy. Y'all are already here, so y'all are already technically in the startup scene. Just keep on connecting with us. If I were someone who is just starting to dabble into entrepreneurship, and I think that I have a good business idea, where do I even start?
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes up quite a bit. Well, first of all, ideas are good, but everybody has ideas. So it's kind of meaningless in the startup space. What you have to do is really kind of start putting a game plan together on that idea. And so you need to do some research, and more than research. I mean, not just Google stuff and kind of look at what's existing out there. I mean, talk to people, talk to your friends and colleagues and coworkers and spouse, pick their brain on what this is, and let people kind of poke holes in it. You need to put a game plan on how you can then execute on that idea, right? And so a lot of times, and this happens a lot with, I think, particularly scientists, people that are have a really strong technical background. This is a hard thing sometimes, because when people are so close to something, and they might be the world's expert in a certain field, but sometimes it's very hard to kind of step back and ask some really just fundamentally basic questions that are important to, launching a commercial entity. And the main one is why would someone buy this? If you can't answer that, then the idea doesn't really make that, that doesn't really matter. And so, I think you have to do the homework, and you got to ask the right questions to make sure that you have a firm understanding of the commercial pliability of this idea that you have, right? And then it goes into all right, now how do we actually build it? How do we execute it? But if you can't answer that first one of who's going to buy this, or why would they buy this? Why is it even necessary? Then you got to go back to the drawing board, right? So I think it's, it sounds so basic, but it is a fundamental thing that you just kind of have to kind of go back to. And I think it sometimes helps to strip it down and to make it really simple, right? Ask real simple questions about on the feasibility of something like this. Which is why I think the people that you ask, it's perfectly okay to ask your neighbor about stuff like this, right? They shouldn't know anything about it. It's like if someone off the street can say, oh yeah, I could see why, that would be necessary, or I could see, using something like that, then it's starting to resonate.
Yeah, definitely. I always, whenever I was building my first app in college, the way that I battle hardened my ideas was I looked into first principle thinking, which y'all can find loads of information on first principle thinking on the internet. It's reflecting back on what Dave just said, is these very basic core function questions that you should be asking. They're so simple and often overlooked, but they will like really help you hone in on what you're actually trying to solve for. So actually this kind of bleeds into the next question from the audience. Can you share any advice on finding a co-founder? What have you learned or experienced that would inform your choice for a co-founder?
That's a great question. Some people are kind of afraid to find a co-founder. I found that some individuals are a little reluctant to do this, and I'm not sure it's exactly because they don't want to share the idea or what, but I think being open to that idea is huge. I remember Josh talking about this recently, about one of the things that can change the trajectory of a startup overnight is adding one person, right? Like it literally can completely change the dynamics of what you are doing. And so that's why someone should consider it. So how do you go finding one? If I had an answer to that, I'd probably be doing something like, dating services, because it's more art than science. I think it's a lot like dating. I think you need to talk to a lot of people. And I think for me, it really comes down to finding people where the idea that you're working on resonates with them, and they get just as geeked out and as excited as you are about it, but also they bring to the table something that you don't have that you need. And so I think part of it is the chemistry, which I think is huge, because you got to realize that you're going to spend a lot of time and sleepless nights working on stuff together. And so if there's, if it's someone that you don't want to hang out with, then it's probably not a good idea. It doesn't mean they have to be best friends, but I think that there has to be some chemistry there. And so that's hugely important for me. And the best way to do it is just talk to as many people as possible. Again, places like Capital Factory, that's kind of a cool way of doing it, right? Like through the corridors, through these virtual events. This is why I participate in a lot of these types of sessions and kind of mentoring sessions. Not only do I get to see other entrepreneurs and see what they're doing, but I meet other people. I meet other co-founders. I meet other investors and advisors, and they're occasionally I find people like, oh man, that guy was really cool. I really like that guy. I'm gonna keep his contact info and kind of make sure that we keep in touch. And who knows if something happens down the road. But I look at it kind of like dating. It's like there are a lot of really smart people out there, but it takes more than smarts, as you know. Like there's a lot more that is involved in making something successful. So I think it's really finding the right match that's going to help you and your business kind of grow to that next level. So I go to as many of these functions as possible just to meet individuals. But then have like real genuine conversations, right? Like not just business speak, like what they're like and what they're doing and their past experiences. And I think for me, it's real evident when I meet someone, I'm like, yeah, that person was really cool. I really like meeting with them and they would seem really genuine. And those are the types of things that I get attracted to. And then if it's a skill that I'm seeking out, then it becomes much easier to kind of tap their shoulder.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you're an extroverted person, but typically whenever I leave a conversation with someone who is just as deep as I am, and we kind of jive on the same interest, I leave that conversation with so much more energy and even more excited about whatever it is that I'm working on. So I think that's a good, and obviously like there's science behind that, but it's very rare to find, and it's very much like dating. I say this to all of our founders all the time whenever they're trying to raise capital, just like investors. They're gauging you just as much as you should be gauging them, and it's very much like dating. And you're not going to walk up to a girl at a bar on the first day and say, "Marry me." Like, you just won't do that. So so make sure to nurture those relationships. So piggyback off. Oh, actually, wait. There was a question here in the chat that I didn't see. How would you recommend building your initial network of potential investors?
Well, I think this is kind of a continuous process for most people that are in this entrepreneurial track, right? Even when you're not looking for money, you should kind of be continuously building this potential network of investors. And so, they come in all shapes and flavors. There are many people that I've met who are not professional investors, but they are like, really, they are, these are the people that are more, I guess they're more connected to like the human side of someone working on something that they find really passionate, right? So angels kind of fall in that suit, and they can come in a million different flavors. And so some of them are active in places like Capital Factory, and some of them are not. Some of them just kind of are in their own stream, and you kind of have to meet them through other introductions. And so I don't only depend on kind of the traditional paths for finding these individuals. I kind of, like the number one rule in sales is like, whether you had a successful sales meeting or not, you always ask for the business, but also you ask for other references, right? Like other people that maybe could use this type of service. And so kind of the same way, it's like, as I meet interesting people, I ask them like, hey, like, this was a great conversation. I'm like super excited that you're, that you have this background in entrepreneurship. And, if you ever, think of someone else that you think that I should meet that has this interest or what I'm working on, like I always ask them for these types of kind of avenues. And it's easy once you kind of strike up a friendship with someone, it becomes really easy to kind of extend that. And then a lot of times they'll be like, oh yeah, like I definitely need to introduce you to this guy. He's great, blah, blah, blah. And, a lot of times that one encounter can lead to 3 or 4 encounters. So it's kind of this continuous process, right? You're picking little pebbles all the time. You put in your little sack and you kind of go along the way. And so I kind of look at it as this process.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that process. So piggybacking off that last question, when it does come to fundraising, from your perspective, what is the best way to go about raising capital for, your MVP? Should it be friends and family, savings, angels? I know we previously in our conversation, we kind of talked about picking out of all these different ways to bootstrap a business, but what do you think is the best way to actually start?
There's no way to answer this in one succinct way, just because it largely depends on how much you need. So if it's a smaller amount, let's say under $1 million, where you genuinely think, if I had X hundreds of thousands of dollars, it can get me to do A, B, and C, and or this runway. If you think that's all you need, then by all means try to do it through friends and family, if at all possible, right? You just do it through convertible, or promissory notes, right? These are basically IOUs that you're getting, and and if you could get people to do that and throw money at you, and you could do it, then by all means that's the best way. If it's realistically though, you need hundreds of thousands or million or more dollars to do that, then that's not a realistic way of doing it, unless you happen to have a really wealthy friends and family list. And so in most cases, then you really need to start thinking about an angel round to do some seed funding to get you started, or a VC round to get you there. But again, it depends on what you're going to use that money for and what that money does. If one round can get you to beta testing and commercializing and product launch and scaling to a certain degree, then that's all you need, right? But if you need a certain amount of money to get to, build a prototype and test this in a marketplace, that's kind of proving certain things. And then after that, you need another round. Then you have to kind of do it in tranches. So you have to then put together a strategy of, okay, I think we need a $500,000 angel round. that'll get us through 2 years. And then once we prove that out, then I think we'll have enough of a story then to go to VCs to pitch them for a fuller round, right? So you got to kind of think about the things that you're going to need to share with a professional investor that, you know, they're going to want to see before you kind of leapfrog from 0 to $5 million, right? So in some cases, people want to just go straight to VC, but you don't have a bit long enough story yet to interest anyone, because they're going to tell you, you know, things like, I need to see more traction. That's a polite way of saying you haven't done enough work yet. You need to do a heck of a lot more and then come back to me.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And then I've also learned that, you know, through fundraising strategy, I used to think of it, as a lot of first-time founders do, as, you know, you're just raising 1.5 million, and that'll get us to here. And that's kind of like all you're kind of thinking about, but you're also looking at those milestones that you're looking to reach. Will those milestones actually interest the seed investor, or will they interest the Series A investor? Do you have a good enough story to keep telling it throughout all of these rounds to gain the interest of each consecutive round? So really, you should be focused on the short term, and that's the thing about startup. It's like you have to be focused on the short term, but you also have to be focused on the long term and be able to work in between both of those areas.
Yeah.
So when it comes to etiquette, this will be our final question. When it comes to etiquette and engaging with a mentor, what are some classic mistakes that you think founders have personally made with you, or just general to mentors? What is a great way for a founder to interact with you and, you know, request resources and build a relationship with yourself?
Yeah, well, you know, I haven't really experienced too many, you know, errors in this area. You know, I think my advice is just be genuine with, you know, the people that you're talking to. Just about everyone that I've met, particularly through Capital Factory, has always been very gracious, because, you know, they know that mentors are giving some of their time to be with them. But, you know, etiquette has never really kind of popped up, you know, where I'm like, boy, that was an uncomfortable scenario. You know, I think it's never happened to me. I've heard some stories. I think if someone were to be like very aggressively like seeking a mentor out for money, you know, that's probably not the best place to do that. But, you know, no one's ever done that to me. I think just be genuine, you know, with their time, and be genuine with yourself. And I think, and if you're that way, then you could ask just about anything of that mentor without offending them in most cases, right? So, you know, I think just be very conscientious of, you know, you're seeking them out for information and advice, and, you know, and if you're coachable, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to continue providing that to you. So I think it's a great resource to have, right? Like, it's kind of, if you think about it, like, it's kind of cool that you can have a list of people to go to ask for things like this. Like, that didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. So I think most people realize that. So for me, it's been always a really good experience. So I've never really had anything bad happen in that way.
And that's awesome. We have a powerful community that are filled with wonderful people. So I think that kind of wraps up our conversation today. I was so grateful to have this opportunity to chat with you, learn more about your background, and get some advice from you. And I know the audience is also really happy that we had you here today. So my name is Adam Valenta. Y'all can actually, on my little thing right here, that is my Twitter. So y'all can go follow me if y'all like. Dave, you should have put your Twitter in there as well, so people could follow you. But my email, if anyone is interested in talking to me, is adamvalenta@capitalfactory.com. And Dave, if you want to, you know, have the opportunity to plug yourself in, you can go for it right now.
Sure. My Twitter handle is Dave Lee, at Dave Lee Houston. And if you go to Capital Factory onto the Union, you can find my full profile there. So you can reach out to me there.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, I hope everyone has a great day, and we will be hopefully seeing everyone soon in person at our events. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you, Adam.
you.